Kash Patel looked at the screen, then looked away from it. And in that one beat of hesitation, the entire Epstein problem sat in the room with him. Ted Lieu had just played a clip, journalist Michael Wolff describing photographs Jeffrey Epstein once claimed to have shown him, and then he asked the director of the FBI a plain question. "Are there any photographs of Donald Trump with girls of uncertain age?" Patel said no. And Lieu, calm, not raising his voice, asked the only follow-up that actually counted. "How do you know that?" That exchange happened in a House hearing that ran roughly 5 hours, and most of it faded into the usual noise. This one moment didn't, because months later, this week, a federal judge picked up the exact thread Patel couldn't hold and turned a non-answer into a court order. This is Professor Alex, and if you want the version with the receipts and none of the theater, take a second to subscribe, because the part that matters isn't the shouting, it's what a judge just forced into the open in the first days of July 2026. Let me take you back into that room, because the answer Patel gave Lieu tells you almost everything. How do you know there are no such photos? Patel's reply was that this kind of information would have surfaced by now, that multiple administrations and FBI investigators had spent 20 years turning the case over, and if it existed, it would have come to light. Sit with that for a second. That's not evidence. That's an assumption dressed as a conclusion. It's the head of the country's premier law enforcement agency being asked whether a specific thing exists and answering with a theory about why it probably doesn't. Lieu heard it too, so he pivoted. Fine, forget the photos, let's talk about the tapes. Michael Wolff has said for years that he holds something like 100 hours of recorded conversations with Epstein. That's not a rumor Lieu invented. Wolff has stated it publicly, repeatedly. And Lieu's question was almost insultingly simple. Has the FBI subpoenaed those tapes? Patel said he didn't know. He didn't know. The director of the FBI, in a hearing specifically about the Epstein investigation, could not say whether his own bureau had gone after 100 hours of tape from a man who spent years talking to Epstein directly. Now, maybe there's an innocent version of that. Maybe he genuinely didn't have it in front of him. Directors don't memorize every subpoena. But that's the thing about a hearing. The questions aren't a surprise. Everybody in that room knew Epstein was the topic. Everybody knew Wolff's tapes were part of the public conversation, and the man in the chair didn't have the answer ready. That's not a gotcha, that's a signal. When you can't say whether you've pursued the most obvious lead in the most scrutinized case in the country, either you haven't or you'd rather not say. Neither one is comfortable. Then it got sharper. Lieu asked about the estate, because here's a detail that keeps getting lost. A lot of the material people are demanding doesn't sit in an FBI vault. It sits with Jeffrey Epstein's estate, run by his longtime lawyer and his accountant. And that estate has held a lot that's never been public. So Lieu made the obvious move. Wouldn't it be great, he said, if the FBI just subpoenaed the estate for all of it? And Patel's answer was strange. He said the estate is under no obligation to hand that material over, even if you subpoena it, even pursuant to a subpoena. Lieu didn't let that sit. 2 words. That's false. And he's right to push, because that's not how subpoenas work. A subpoena is a legal command. You can fight it, you can move to quash it, you can litigate the scope, but under no obligation to comply is not a description of a subpoena, it's a description of a suggestion. The director framed a compulsory legal tool as if it were optional. Small moment, tells you a lot about the posture. And that's really the through line of the whole day. Not a smoking gun, a posture. A consistent lean toward doing the minimum the law strictly requires while describing it as maximum transparency. Watch how many of these exchanges follow the same shape. A Democrat asks why more hasn't been released. Patel answers that he's released more than anyone, that the Biden and Obama administrations had the same chance and did nothing. Dan Goldman from New York pressed him on why the FBI hadn't released interview reports from people involved in the investigation, the actual witness statements, the 302s, the raw material. Patel said they were releasing as much as legally allowed, and Goldman, who was a federal prosecutor for a decade, wasn't having the lecture. Patel asked him, "Do you know how court orders work?" Goldman's answer landed hard. "I was a prosecutor, a real prosecutor, for years." And then the line that became the headline, "You are hiding the Epstein files. You are part of the cover-up." That's a heavy accusation to throw at a sitting FBI director in an open hearing. And I want to be careful here because this is exactly where these stories go off the rails. Goldman calling it a cover-up is an allegation, not a finding. It's a member of Congress making a political charge in a committee room. It is not proof of anything. But the reason it stung is that it collided with Patel's own words from before he had the job. Jamie Raskin, the ranking Democrat, played a clip of Patel from 2023, sitting across from a right-wing podcaster, being asked why the so-called Epstein list hadn't come out. And Patel's answer back then was 4 words: because of who's on that list. That's Patel, before the badge, telling the world the only reason the names stayed hidden was the identity of the people in them. And when he was confirmed, he made a promise in writing: no cover-ups, no missing documents, no stone left unturned. So you can see why the room turned. The man who once said the list was buried because of who's on it was now the man explaining, at length, why so much had to stay buried. Here's where I have to slow down and be honest with you, because the internet has turned this into something it isn't. There is a version of this story circulating right now: AI-generated videos, fake transcripts, a supposed secret recording where Patel admits he was told to bury the investigation and then pleads the fifth. None of that happened. Fact-checkers traced it to a page that manufactures fake stories about public figures using AI. There was no secret tape. There was no March hearing where he took the fifth over it. The recording Lieu actually played was a publicly available Wolf interview, and Patel wasn't even in it. I'm telling you this because I'm not here to sell you a fantasy that's more exciting than the truth. The truth is more useful. And the truth is that you don't need a secret tape to see the problem. The problem is on the record, in a real hearing, in the director's own hesitations. So let's deal with the client list, because this is the phrase that poisons every conversation about Epstein. People say, the client list, like it's a document sitting in a drawer with names on it. Here's what the government actually said. In July of 2025, the FBI and the Justice Department put out a joint memo, and after what they called an exhaustive review, they stated there was no incriminating client list. No credible evidence that Epstein blackmailed prominent people. No basis to open investigations into uncharged third parties. That memo is real, and it matters, and it cuts against the conspiracy version hard. But, and this is the part both sides skip, that same memo also said they wouldn't release anything more. And that's what detonated. Because you cannot tell a furious public, there's nothing there, and we're also closing the door, in the same breath, and expect them to relax. That combination is what turned Epstein from a partisan fight into a bipartisan revolt. And I mean bipartisan. Watch what Thomas Massie did in that same hearing, a Republican, one of the loudest voices for release. Patel had claimed there was no credible information that Epstein trafficked women to anyone other than himself. Massie pushed back and pointed out that alleged victims had given the FBI interviews, describing allegations against something like 20 men. Patel's dodge was to say it wasn't his call. It was the assessment of 3 separate U.S. attorneys. But think about what just happened there. A Republican congressman, on the same side as the Democrats, telling the FBI director that the Bureau's own victim interviews contradict the tidy line that Epstein acted alone. When the pressure is coming from Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jamie Raskin at the same time, you're not watching a partisan squabble anymore. You're watching the floor shift. Now, the White House has an answer for all of this, and fairness demands I give it to you straight. Their position is that this is a manufactured hoax, that Democrats knew about Epstein's victims for years and did nothing, and are now weaponizing those victims for politics. Patel's own framing is that he spent his time making the country safer at record speed, not running a cover-up. And on the specific question of the president, Patel testified that Trump was absolutely not implicated, though he admitted he didn't know offhand how many times Trump's name appeared in the files. That's the administration's case, and you're entitled to weigh it. My job isn't to tell you they're lying. My job is to show you where the words and the actions stop lining up and let you sit with the gap. Which brings us to that birthday letter. You've probably seen it referenced. The House Oversight Committee released a note, purportedly to Epstein, from a, quote, birthday book, with a drawing of a woman's body and a bit of imagined dialogue, and it carries Trump's name. The Wall Street Journal reported on it. The estate is where it came from, not the FBI, which is its own tell, because it raises the question of why the Bureau didn't have it or didn't surface it. Trump has flatly and repeatedly denied writing it. He's denied it, he's called it fake, he's pursued legal action over the reporting. And in the hearing, When a Democrat asked whether Patel would investigate the estate for putting out a forged document with the president's signature, Patel said he would look into the release of it. So even the letter is contested ground. It exists. Its authenticity is denied. Both things are true at once, and anyone who tells you it's settled in either direction is selling you something. I keep coming back to the same uncomfortable center of all this. Appearing in Epstein's files is not a crime. His contact book, his flight logs, his emails, they're full of powerful names, and the Justice Department itself has said plainly that many of those people have not been tied to any wrongdoing. Trump, Bill Clinton, Elon Musk, the former Prince Andrew, a sitting cabinet secretary, names surface in these documents. And a name in a file is a name in a file. It is not a verdict. There is an entire industry online right now built on collapsing that distinction, on treating proximity as proof, and it does real damage to the truth, and frankly to the actual victims, whose stories get buried under a landslide of guessing. So hold two things at once. The government withholding material is a legitimate scandal, and a name appearing in an unverified tip is not evidence of a crime. Both, at the same time. That's the discipline this story demands, and almost nobody applies it. Here's a concrete example of exactly that trap. When the DOJ finally did a big release, it included an FBI document, a list of allegations against Trump, compiled from tips that came into the Bureau, some of it right before the 2020 election. And the DOJ's own statement on it was blunt, unfounded, false, secondhand, submitted by the public. The kind of thing that, if it had a shred of credibility, would have been used against him years ago. So even the material that looks damning on a screenshot turns out, on inspection, to be a folder of unverified complaints the government itself is disowning. That's the swamp you're wading into every time someone posts a bombshell file. It might be a real document, and it might be a real document full of nothing. So why does a hearing from months ago matter right now, in July? Because Congress didn't let it die. After that joint memo tried to slam the door, the backlash was loud enough and bipartisan enough that lawmakers passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and the president signed it into law. That law did something specific and clever. It didn't just ask nicely for the files. It ordered the Justice Department to produce them, and it stripped away the usual excuses. It said you cannot redact something merely because it's embarrassing, or because it causes reputational harm, or because it's politically sensitive. Read that again. The law names the three excuses that get used to bury names, and forbids them. That's the whole game. And the DOJ, weeks past the deadline the law set, finally dumped an enormous release. Millions of pages, 180,000 images, thousands of videos. On paper, transparency. In practice, a mess. Survivors said their private information got exposed all over again. Names that should have been public stayed blacked out. Names that should have been protected leaked. And the department's number 2 said out loud that new charges against anyone were unlikely. And that's the collision. Because a federal judge looked at that release and at the law's plain text and said the department was still not complying. This week, the first days of July, the DOJ has been under a court order to go back and unredact names it had hidden. Names in emails that appear to discuss trafficking women. Names of potential co-conspirators in a draft indictment against Epstein that was drawn up years ago and never filed, where 4 of the 5 names are still blacked out. The judge ordered the department to release documents that aren't even in English, which it had quietly declined to do, and to produce a full log explaining every single redaction, line by line, decision by decision. The acting attorney general, the court found, effectively conceded he was in violation of the very law he's sworn to follow. So the excuse Patel leaned on in that hearing, court orders, legally allowed, our hands are tied, has been turned completely inside out. Now it's the court doing the tying. And it's tying the government to release, not to conceal. Do you see the shape of it now? In September, an FBI director couldn't say whether he'd chased the obvious tapes, told a congressman a subpoena was optional, and hid behind court orders and legal limits. In July, a judge read the law Congress passed in response and said those limits don't cover what you've been hiding, and you're out of time. The non-answer became the crux. What Patel wouldn't say in a hearing room, a courtroom is now forcing onto the public record, or forcing the department to explain, in writing, exactly why it won't. And here's the money question, the one that outlives all the noise. If, after all of this, the The biggest names still come out clean. No charges, no incriminating list, no smoking photo. The conspiracy crowd will scream cover-up louder than ever, and they'll never be satisfied. But if the names stay redacted, if the log comes back full of holes, if the department keeps finding new reasons to keep the door shut a few more inches, then the people who spent years saying there's nothing there have a problem that no memo can fix. Because you don't fight this hard, this long, past this many deadlines, over nothing. So let me leave you with the thing I can't shake. The most honest sentence spoken in that entire 5-hour hearing might have been the one Patel didn't mean to say. I don't know. Not the denials, not the deflections, not the talking points. Just 3 words admitting the Bureau might never have gone after the most obvious evidence in the most watched case in America. The question was never really whether there's a magic list. The question is why the people holding the files keep needing a judge to make them open the drawer. What are you not supposed to see badly enough that a law had to name your excuses and take them away one by one? This is Professor Alex. I'll see you in the next one.